My father threw cake at me when I refused to give my apartment to my brother's pregnant girlfriend. They threw a chocolate cake at me because I wouldn't give them the home I worked 6 years to buy, and that was just the beginning. You won't believe how my own family tried to bully me out of my apartment for my brother's baby, and how far I had to go to finally reclaim my life. I'm a 29-year-old man now, but everything that led to this whole disaster started about 7 years back. That was when my grandfather passed away. He was a kind man, and I still think about him often. In his will, he left his house to me and my younger brother, Dylan. Dylan's 26 now. The will was straightforward. We each inherited half of the property. No legal loopholes or confusion. When Grandpa died, I was 22 and still in college, grinding through my final semesters. Dylan was just 19, finishing up his last year of high school. Our dad, Martin, had moved in with Grandpa to help out during his final years, and after Grandpa passed, Dad just stayed in the house. Dylan moved in too. Honestly, it seemed like the obvious arrangement at the time. I was still living in a shared apartment on campus, then later in some modest rentals once I started working after graduation. I didn't need a room in Grandpa's house. We had a simple understanding. Dad and Dylan would live there rent-free, and in exchange, they'd take care of all the household expenses, things like the property tax, utilities, and general maintenance. I was fine with that. It felt like I was doing my part to support them, and it didn't seem unfair. Our mom was never really in the picture. She left when I was really young, so it was Dad who raised both of us. I always felt like we had a fairly average relationship, not super tight, but nothing unusual. I never imagined that one day I'd feel so blindsided by the people closest to me. After graduating at 23, I landed a full-time job and locked in on one major goal, to buy a home of my own. That became my mission. For 6 straight years, I worked my tail off. I took every overtime opportunity one could get. No tropical getaways, no impulse buys, no flashy upgrades. My car's still an old hatchback, but it gets the job done. My clothes are basic, nothing fancy. I packed my own lunches. Every spare dime went straight into a savings account. Progress was slow, but steady. Friends would ask me to go out, join weekend trips, or splurge on events, and more often than not, I'd decline. It wasn't always fun saying no, but I had this picture in my head of holding the keys to my very own place. And finally, earlier this year, I made it happen. I'd saved up enough to put down a solid deposit on a 2-bedroom flat. It cost me £160,000. It's not luxurious, but it's in a quiet part of Birmingham, close to my job, and safe. Exactly what I needed. Signing those ownership papers felt like one of the biggest milestones of my life. I spent the first few weeks painting the rooms myself, buying just the essentials: bed, couch, dining table, a few chairs. It took some time to pull together, but about 2 months ago, I officially moved in. For the first time ever, I had something that was completely mine, and I worked for every inch of it. But almost as soon as I settled in, tension started brewing. It felt like my flat somehow triggered something in my family. The way my dad and Dylan reacted, it was like they believed my income belonged to them in some unspoken way. That just because I was earning and didn't have a family of my own, I should be sharing my money, or at least asking their permission before spending it. If I mentioned getting a year-end bonus or hitting a savings goal, Dad would instantly suggest something I could buy for the house, by which he meant Grandpa's house, the one they were living in. One time it was a new boiler they apparently needed. I reminded him that they were living there rent-free and maintenance was their responsibility. But then he started talking about how bad the heating situation was and how Dylan was constantly cold. I caved and gave him half the cost in the end. Dylan wasn't much different. Even after he got a part-time gig at a nearby electronics store, he'd often message me things like, "Hey, can you send me £40? My bank transfer's delayed." Or, "I didn't expect my phone bill to be this high." It wasn't massive amounts, but the requests came often. Her go-to argument was always the same. I earned more than she did, I didn't have kids, and I wasn't in a relationship, so in her eyes, I had no major responsibilities and should be helping more. I'd often give in, mostly to avoid drama, but deep down it started to wear on me. Then, about 2 years back, Dylan began dating a woman named Claire. She's around 27 now. After they'd been together for a while, maybe just under a year, Claire moved into our grandfather's old house with Dylan and Dad. I wasn't thrilled about it. I'd met her a few times, seemed polite enough, but she never appeared to have a stable job. She'd talk about finding the right opportunity, or freelancing here and there. But mostly, she just seemed to be hanging around the house. After Claire moved in, the financial requests from that household really picked up. My dad would ring me up saying the heating bill was outrageous or that a pipe had started leaking. I began pushing back more firmly, reminding him there were now 3 adults living there, and surely they could handle their own expenses without leaning on me. But whenever I set that boundary, he'd sound let down, accusing me of not understanding their struggles or saying I was being cold toward my own family. Then a few months ago, right around the time I was finalizing everything for my new flat, Dylan told us Claire was expecting. He dropped the news during a Sunday dinner. Our dad looked like he'd just won the lottery, absolutely thrilled about the idea of becoming a granddad. I congratulated them, of course. It was a big moment. No one brought up any talk of them moving or changing their living setup. I figured they'd stay in that house for now, and eventually, like most couples do, find their own place once the baby came. There are 3 bedrooms, so they weren't exactly cramped. As far as I knew, nothing was changing. About a month after I'd finished settling into my new apartment, just as I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe, Dad called me. He said we needed to have a family meeting, and that it was very important. He asked me to come by Grandpa's house that weekend. I didn't read too much into it. I assumed it was about the baby, maybe discussing baby shower plans or throwing around name ideas. I wasn't expecting anything serious or life-altering. That Saturday, I drove over in the afternoon. When I walked into the living room, Dad, Dylan, and Claire were already sitting there, looking unusually solemn. There was a chocolate cake placed neatly on the coffee table. That immediately struck me as odd. What kind of urgent family meeting comes with dessert? Before I could even sit down, Dad launched into this speech. He went on and on about how family means showing up for each other, how we all have to make sacrifices to support one another, and how tough times reveal who truly cares. Then the conversation shifted. It turned to Dylan and the baby. He said that Claire was pregnant, and this was a delicate, emotional time in their lives. Dad started explaining how Claire had been doing everything she could to land a steady job, but with the current job market being what it was, nothing had really worked out yet. Dylan kept staring down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable, and Claire didn't say much either. She just sat there fidgeting, eyes on her lap. And then, without even easing into it, Dad dropped the bomb. He said that since I was living alone in a freshly bought 2-bedroom flat, and since Dylan and Claire were about to start a family and needed a stable environment for the baby, the obvious and fair thing to do was to hand over my apartment to them. He didn't ask. He told me, like this was the only sensible solution anyone with a heart would make. He even smiled, like he had just cracked a complex puzzle, and I should be grateful he figured it out. According to him, I could just move back into the spare room at Grandpa's old house. He called it a family duty, and even tossed in that it was the moral, generous thing to do, despite the fact that none of us had ever been particularly religious. I was stunned. Honestly, I think my mouth actually fell open. I just stood there, silent for a second, trying to wrap my head around what he'd said. Give them my apartment? The place I'd worked toward for 6 long years? The one I finally owned? Dad kept going, insisting I didn't need that much space on my own anyway. He said Dylan and Claire needed a fresh beginning for the baby, a clean slate, and my flat, with its new fixtures and freshly painted walls, was perfect for that. He even said it would be easier for him to help with the baby if they were in my apartment, because it was newer and nicer than the old family house. When I finally found my voice again, I stayed calm. I told them, directly and clearly, no, absolutely not. I explained that I had saved and sacrificed for 6 years to afford that apartment. It was mine, bought with my own money. I wasn't giving it up. I told them they had 2 very reasonable options: stay in Grandpa's house, which had more than enough room, or find their own place like any couple starting a family would do. That's when everything changed. My dad's whole expression hardened. His face turned red and his voice snapped from warm and persuasive to furious and loud. He started shouting that I was selfish beyond belief, that I was ungrateful, and that I had benefited from their generosity by not being charged rent or forced to sell my share of the family house, completely twisting the truth. I co-owned that house, and they'd been living there rent-free the entire time. Claire burst into tears. She was sobbing loud, dramatic, gut-wrenching sobs, saying, "How could you not care about your own brother or his baby? How can you be so heartless?" Dylan finally looked up and muttered something like, "I didn't think you were this kind of person." This is messed up. Things escalated quickly from there. The yelling got louder, more personal. I held my ground but kept my tone even. I repeated what I'd already said. My apartment is not up for negotiation. My dad started pacing around the room. Then, out of nowhere, he stomped over to the coffee table, grabbed a big handful of that chocolate cake with his bare hand, and hurled it straight at me. It slammed into my chest and splattered up into my face and hair. He was full-on screaming by that point, saying I was a disgrace, a failure of a son, and that I was putting my own selfishness ahead of the needs of a helpless unborn child. Claire was wailing. Dylan looked shocked but still managed to nod along with Dad like he agreed. I didn't scream back. I calmly picked up a napkin, wiped the cake from my shirt and face, and said, "This conversation is over." I turned and walked toward the door. All three of them were shouting behind me, Dad yelling that I would regret this for the rest of my life, that if I left without agreeing, I was no longer his son. Claire was crying that I was endangering her pregnancy by stressing her out like this. It was just a storm of shouting and guilt-tripping. I shut the door behind me and drove home, still smelling like frosting and cheap chocolate. At first, I felt nothing, just numb. But by the time I got back to my flat, the anger set in. The calls started almost immediately. First from Dad, then Dylan, then Claire. I didn't pick up. I let it all go to voicemail. The messages? Just more of the same accusations, emotional blackmail, outrage. The following week was a nightmare. My phone was blowing up with notifications every hour. Dad sent me walls of text, long, rambling rants about how I was destroying the family, how I was a disappointment, how I owed this to Dylan and Claire. Dad kept sending messages about all the things he'd sacrificed for us when we were kids, how he always put us first, how he gave everything he had. Dylan's texts were shorter but way more emotional. Things like, "You're going to cause me to lose this baby. Hope you're happy. My child deserves a safe home, and you're denying it." He even sent me a blurry photo of an ultrasound with a message that said, "This is who you're hurting." I stared at it for a long time, just trying to believe this was actually happening. Then the extended family started chiming in. Dad clearly made the rounds, calling up every relative he could. My aunts, his sisters, began blowing up my phone. Even a few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me on social media. And every single one of them was repeating the same script, clearly fed to them word for word. I was selfish. I was heartless. I was rich now because I owned a flat and was refusing to support my poor pregnant brother and his partner. One aunt even told me I needed to be a real man and do the honorable thing. Another accused me of abandoning my responsibilities to the family. No one seemed to know or care that Dylan and Claire were already living rent-free in a house I legally co-owned. No one acknowledged that they were demanding I give up the home I just bought with my own money after working my butt off for years. At first, I tried to explain to the first aunt who called. I calmly told her the full situation, but she cut me off almost instantly, saying, "Family comes first. End of story." That was when I realized reason wouldn't get me anywhere. So I wrote a single message and sent it in a group chat to Dad and Dylan. It said, "My decision about my apartment is final. It does not belong to you. I will not be handing it over." What happened at the so-called family meeting, especially the moment Dad threw cake at me, along with the nonstop harassment since then, is completely unacceptable. Do not contact me again about this issue. I had hoped that would shut things down. Instead, it threw more fuel on the fire. The messages kept coming. I started blocking numbers, Dad's, Dylan's, then the aunt's. Every day was stressful. I couldn't sleep properly. It was like they had all genuinely convinced themselves that I was the villain for saying no to something that should have never been asked in the first place. They didn't want to understand what this apartment meant to me. They didn't want to hear about the years of overtime, the sacrifices, the nights I said no to going out just to save money. They didn't care that they already had a free place to live that I partially owned and quietly supported in little ways over the years. All they saw was what they thought I owed them. That chaotic family meeting, cake and all, happened about a month ago. The harassment continued nonstop, calls, messages, manipulation, until I started systematically shutting it down by blocking everyone. There's still been no apology. No attempt at resolution. Just louder outrage. More entitlement. They truly believe I've wronged them. That I'm heartless for protecting what's mine. Since walking out of that house, I haven't spoken to my father or brother at all, aside from that one final message. Every conversation since has been one way. Them abusing me, making demands, or rallying other people to pressure me. It took me a few weeks to really clear my head. But once I had some distance, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just a moment of madness. This was who they are. To them, I'm not a person. I'm a paycheck, a resource, a walking solution to their problems. They don't see me as someone with a life, rights, or boundaries. Their sense of entitlement is so huge, they can't even comprehend how inappropriate their demand was. They were living rent-free in a house I half own, a house I've quietly helped support, and yet they still felt justified in asking for more. That was the breaking point for me. Something inside just snapped. Last week, I hired a lawyer. I found someone who specializes in property disputes. I laid everything out, every detail. I showed him the will, the deed, the messages. He confirmed what I already knew. The house belongs to Dylan and me, split evenly. There's no clause that says Dad or Dylan has any permanent right to live there. The lawyer explained a legal process called a partition sale. If co-owners can't agree on how to handle a shared property, one can go to court and request that a judge order the house to be sold. Once it's sold, the money is divided fairly between the owners. It's a common solution for exactly this kind of situation. So, that's what I'm doing. I formally instructed my lawyer to begin the partition process. If Dylan and Claire want to stay in the house, Dylan will have to buy out my half. We estimated the house's market value at around £300,000 to £340,000. That means my share would come to somewhere between £150,000 and £170,000. Given their financial situation and the fact that Claire hasn't held down steady work, I seriously doubt they'll be able to afford that. So realistically, the house will probably go on the open market, be sold, and Dylan and I will split the proceeds. But it also means they'll all have to move out, Dad, Dylan, Claire, and figure out a new place to live. And it means that whatever relationship I had with them is most likely done, for good. I've also made the decision to go completely no contact, not just with them, but with every extended family member who joined in the harassment. Anyone who thought it was okay to treat me like a villain for protecting my boundaries is out of my life now. I'm sharing this here on Reddit because honestly, I just need to get it off my chest. And maybe, just maybe, I need to hear from someone else that I'm not losing my mind. So, am I wrong for doing this? Update 1. Hey everyone, it's been about 2 months since I first shared my story here. First off, I genuinely want to say thank you. I read every single comment and private message that came in. Honestly, I expected a mixed bag. Maybe some folks telling me I was being too cold or needed to compromise. But instead, nearly all of you were incredibly supportive. Many of you gave thoughtful advice, shared your own experiences, and helped me realize that I wasn't losing my mind for thinking their demand was absurd. Just hearing other people clearly recognize how messed up it was really helped strengthen my resolve. It reminded me that what I was feeling wasn't just emotional, it was reasonable. A lot of you had similar questions, so I figured I'd clear a few things up. Some people wondered if there was anything hidden in my grandfather's will, some kind of clause giving Dad or Dylan lifelong rights to the house. I asked my lawyer to go through it with a fine-toothed comb. His conclusion was crystal clear. The will is simple and direct. The house was left to me and Dylan, both named specifically split 50-50 as tenants in common. That's it. No extra clauses, no mention of anyone else having the right to stay there permanently. No strings attached. As I mentioned briefly before, my lawyer reached out to a few local property agents for a ballpark estimate. Grandpa's place is a detached 3-bedroom home in a quiet, mid-range neighborhood on the outskirts of Sheffield. According to the agents, it would likely go for somewhere between £275,000 and £310,000 in today's market. So my share would come to about £137,000 to £155,000 before taxes or any legal fees from the sale. Some folks also asked if I'd ever paid into the house before all this. The answer is yes, but irregularly. Over the past 7 years, I chipped in a few £1,000s for urgent stuff. One winter, I paid for half a new boiler because Dad said the heating had gone out. Another time, I helped cover part of the council tax when he claimed he was short. I never made a big deal of it or asked for the money back. I figured as a co-owner, it was fair to help a little. But I never paid rent or anything monthly, and there was no mortgage to worry about. As for Claire's job situation, yeah, still no change as far as I know. She's still living there, still not working steadily. She definitely had no problem chiming in during the family meeting and calling me selfish, even though she's been benefiting from the free ride too. Have I reached out to them since? Nope. After I sent that one final text right after the whole cake-throwing episode, I haven't said another word. My lawyer told me it was better if all communication about the property went through him anyway, and honestly, I wouldn't want to talk to them even if I could. Their behavior made it easy to go silent. Reading through all your comments here, and having a couple of months to breathe and reflect, it's even clearer now than it was then. This was never just about them wanting a nicer home. It was about how they asked, the way they expected it, the way they blew up when I said no. What really stuck with me, and what a lot of you pointed out, is the complete lack of respect. They didn't treat me like an adult with his own goals in life. They treated me like a wallet with legs. Just a means to an end. The fact that they've spent the last few years living rent-free in a property I partially own, while making demands for even more and painting me as the villain, that was the breaking point. Selling the house wasn't my first choice. I didn't want to go that route. But eventually, I saw it was the only option that would allow me to make a clean, permanent cut. It was the only way to stop them from using that house, my share of it, as a way to guilt or control me. Asking for rent would have just turned into more fights, more drama, more manipulation. I knew they'd either ignore it or twist it into some new narrative where I was heartless again. I needed something final, so I followed through. Here's how it went with the lawyer and the property. Step 1 was finding the right person. I didn't just want a general solicitor. I specifically looked for someone with experience handling property conflicts between family members. After a bit of digging, I found someone who came highly recommended for exactly that kind of work. Our first consultation lasted about 90 minutes. I walked him through everything from the inheritance, to Dylan and Claire moving in, to the family meeting, and yes, the chocolate cake being launched at my head. The lawyer didn't rush me. He listened carefully to the whole story, didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just took notes and nodded quietly. He asked a few clarifying questions, then laid out the partition sale process in a way that made everything easy to understand. No legal jargon, just straight talk. Step 1. Formal letters. The first thing my solicitor did was draft an official letter to my brother, Dylan, since he's the co-owner. It was sent via recorded delivery. A second copy also went to my dad, just so he was formally notified as a resident. The tone of the letter was respectful, but firm. It stated my intent to sell my 50% stake in the property. It included the fair market estimate, somewhere between £275,000 and £310,000, based on the recent appraisals from local agents. The letter also gave Dylan the first right of refusal. He could buy out my share at market value. We gave him 30 days to respond if he wanted to make that happen. Step 2. Silence. We didn't actually think Dylan would be able to pull it off, and sure enough, he didn't. The 30-day period came and went without a single formal reply from him or any solicitor representing him. But about 2 weeks after the letters were sent out, my dad mailed back a handwritten response. It was several pages long, completely emotional, and pretty hostile. He didn't hold back. He accused me of being greedy, said I was heartless and trying to throw my own brother, his pregnant partner, and their unborn child out into the streets. He even accused me of dishonoring my grandfather's memory. And of course, he demanded I stop this madness immediately. Step 3. Filing with the court. Once the 30-day deadline passed without a valid response, my solicitor filed the partition claim with the regional property court. This is a formal lawsuit requesting that a judge order the sale of the home due to an irreconcilable disagreement between the co-owners. That kicked off the real legal process. Dylan was served official court papers, delivered in person by a professional process server who showed up at the house. Once that happened, things escalated quickly. Step 4. Total meltdown. The moment Dylan got those legal documents in hand, everything changed. Suddenly, it wasn't just a letter from a solicitor. They were in an actual court case now. It was real. And the response from my family? Predictable, just way louder. Dad reportedly started calling my lawyer's office nonstop. He screamed at the receptionist, accused my solicitor of helping me destroy his family, and demanded to speak with him directly. The paralegal stayed calm and professional, simply explaining that Dylan would need to hire his own legal representative. Dylan eventually did, through legal aid. His solicitor filed a response to the lawsuit. From what my lawyer told me, their first move was to delay. Classic tactic. Then they threw out arguments like, Dylan should be allowed to stay in the house because he has limited income and a baby on the way. They suggested I should be forced to sell my half at a discounted price or even let him pay me out in tiny installments stretched over many years. My solicitor wasn't too concerned. He said that sort of argument rarely holds up in court, especially when there's no legal agreement granting them exclusive use of the home. But even before any ruling was made, the biggest shift had already happened. They finally realized I'm serious. This isn't an empty threat. This isn't some dramatic family bluff. The gears are in motion, and we're moving forward whether they like it or not. And from what I've heard, they're absolutely panicking. Dylan, Claire, and Dad are apparently under enormous stress right now. But honestly, that's not on me. They pushed, they manipulated, they demanded. And now they're dealing with the consequences of crossing boundaries I made very clear. Dylan's partner is now in her third trimester, so yeah, timing-wise, this isn't ideal for them. But the truth is, this whole situation came about because of their choices and pressure, not mine. I didn't create this mess. They did, when they decided to treat me like a bank account instead of a sibling. For me, even though the process is still uncomfortable, I feel like I can finally breathe again. Taking legal action lifted a massive weight off my shoulders. It's not just me trying to fight through guilt and emotional manipulation anymore. Now it's a structured, legal process in the hands of professionals. I've kept both Dylan and Dad completely blocked on my phone and social media. Every bit of communication now goes directly through my solicitor and is routed to Dylan's legal aid representative. No drama, no messages, no guilt tripping, just clean lines and paperwork. It's a strange sense of peace. Not fun, but solid. Like I finally have a path forward. And I'm not stepping off it. Not now. Not ever. Update 2. It's now been about 10 months since I first posted here asking whether I was in the wrong. And it's been 8 months since my first update, when this whole legal process was just kicking off. In some ways, it feels like a different lifetime. Everything related to the house sale took a lot longer than I expected, but we finally reached the end. The legal ordeal is over. During those 10 months, my life was pretty much just work and legal paperwork. I kept a low profile, tried to stay focused. The good news? I actually received a small promotion at work a few months back, something positive in the middle of everything falling apart. That helped a bit. As for the house, the court eventually approved and ordered the partition sale. The road to that ruling wasn't smooth. Dylan's legal aid solicitor did everything possible to delay it. They filed motion after motion, requested multiple extensions, made every argument under the sun. One of their main points was that Dylan and Claire should be allowed to stay in the house because they had just become parents and were struggling financially. They framed me as the cold, well-off brother trying to push out a new baby and his exhausted parents. It was the same guilt-tripping narrative all over again, just now delivered in legal language. My solicitor stayed firm. He calmly filed responses explaining I was simply exercising my right as co-owner and that none of this would have even happened if they hadn't demanded I give up my own flat in the first place. He made it clear, this wasn't revenge, it was resolution. There were a couple of brief court hearings, but I didn't have to attend. My lawyer handled all of it. Honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to sit in a courtroom and relive everything face to face. Eventually, the judge ruled exactly as expected. The law was straightforward. We couldn't come to an agreement, so the house had to be sold and the money split. That was it. To ensure things were handled fairly and professionally, the court appointed a neutral estate agent to manage the sale. This way, no one could claim bias or underhanded dealings. But even after that, getting the house listed took more time than I thought. The actual listing process dragged on for another couple of months. As expected, my dad and brother weren't exactly cooperative once the house was listed. The estate agent told my solicitor that scheduling viewings had become a headache. Sometimes no one would answer the door, and other times the place was in such a mess that potential buyers barely stayed 5 minutes. My lawyer had to send a formal warning to Dylan's solicitor, making it clear that if the obstruction continued, we'd involve the court again, and they could be held financially accountable for any delays or extra costs. That seemed to wake them up a little. Things became smoother after that, though I'm sure they weren't happy about it. The house officially went on the market and stayed listed for around 3 months. It attracted a decent amount of attention, and eventually, it sold for £297,000, right about the midpoint of what we were expecting. After all the deductions, agent commission, legal fees for the sale, and standard closing costs, we were left with around £270,000 to divide. That meant my share came out to £135,000. Dylan received the same. Seeing that transfer hit my bank account felt odd, mostly relief. After everything, it was like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. As for Dad, Dylan, Claire, and their baby boy, yes, I learned it's a boy through a distant relative. They had to vacate the property before the deal closed. The estate agent did a final walkthrough and said the house was left mostly clean, with no major damage, which I'd been worried about. Apparently, the place was still cluttered, and they took every last hour before moving out, but at least they did it. I can imagine it must have been stressful. But let's be honest, they had months of advance notice. None of this was a surprise. My life now? Still living in my flat, which honestly feels more like my personal fortress than ever. That £135,000 is now sitting safely in a high-interest savings account. I'm weighing my options, maybe invest it, maybe use it as a deposit for a small rental property one day. For now, just knowing it's there, untouched, and that all financial ties to my family are severed, it's a massive relief. I sleep better. I'm more focused at work. My stress is way down. As for my family, I haven't had any direct contact with any of them. What I do hear trickles in through one of my more distant cousins, the only one who still speaks to me from time to time. They sometimes post vague things online that seem aimed at me. Apparently, Dad has moved in with one of his sisters, my Aunt Julia. From what I gather, it's a small house and not meant for long-term guests, so it's already causing tension. Word is, he's bitter, telling everyone who'll listen that I'm a heartless monster who made his own family homeless for a payday. Dylan and Claire? I've heard they rented a small flat in a town about an hour outside the city where rents are lower. That £135,000 is a big windfall for them. If they manage it well, it could become a deposit on a house or a solid financial cushion. But knowing Claire's patchy work history and their constant past requests for cash from me, let's just say I'm skeptical about how long it'll last. Their child is born now. I've never met him. That's a strange thought. Technically, I'm an uncle, but I've never seen the kid, never heard his name, nothing. It's a disconnect I never imagined would exist. As for the extended family, the same people who once messaged me to call me selfish and cruel, they've gone silent. Not a single apology. Not a single message acknowledging how far things went. A couple of younger cousins, ones I was closer with growing up, did reach out quietly a few months back. I think they either saw my original post or someone shared it with them. They were more understanding, even sympathetic. I was polite, but I kept the conversation short. I didn't invite further discussion. The trust is gone, and I have no interest in rebuilding it. No contact remains firm. I've had zero communication with Dylan or Dad since before the legal action started. They haven't tried to call or message in months. Whether they've accepted it or their lawyers advised them to stop, I don't know. I just know it's been silent. And the silence? It's peaceful. The sale of my grandfather's house marks the true end of this entire miserable chapter. From start to finish, it was painful, exhausting, and deeply disappointing. I've come out of it with a new understanding of my family, not the one I grew up believing I had, but the one that actually existed. It showed me who they were. And more importantly, it helped me finally walk away from it all.